Okay, so welcome everyone once again. If we'll have other attendees that will join us, we'll be more than welcome to have them. So I'm Ben. I am from the Strategic Department here at Argentum, which we'll go into in a minute. And I'd like to welcome you all to our webinar today on bilateral projects in Europe and beyond. Please allow me just to briefly introduce myself. I have a background in academia, I have a PhD in Middle East Studies, and it's my pleasure to present this webinar on bilateral projects. We'll begin this webinar with a short overlook at Argentum, followed by a closer look at the strategic department, my department here at Argentum, and our unique strategy process. From there, we'll head into bilateral projects. First, we'll begin with an overview of bilateral projects, followed by a more detailed look into various programs and calls. So let us first begin with an overview of Argentum. And Argentum specializes in EU research and innovation funding. We were established in 1999, and since then have had vast experience and gained expertise in obtaining governmental funding for innovative technology, research, and development. Currently, we have 30 employees divided into 3 departments: strategy, business development, and consulting and writing team. Our vision is to target innovative funding opportunities and to enhance participation and success in multinational research and innovation projects. Let's discuss more in-depth the strategy department, my department. And we are divided at the strategy department into clusters, with each strategist in charge of one main cluster and one secondary cluster, which correspond with the Horizon Europe clusters. We'll get back to the clusters shortly. First, we'll just discuss very briefly our roles in the department, and we basically accompany clients all throughout their contracts with Argentum. We analyze funding opportunities for our clients based on their short and long-term business and tech development plans, and prepare strategic assessments which aim to provide our clients with a continuous stream of quality funding opportunities. One of those options is bilateral funding, bilateral projects, which we will be discussing today. So as I mentioned earlier, we are divided into clusters, which largely correspond to Horizon Europe clusters. I'm sure most of you are quite familiar, but just so we're all on the same page, Horizon Europe has 3 pillars, and pillar 2 is global challenges and European competitiveness. That pillar is in turn divided into 6 clusters. Very briefly, those are health, culture, civil security for society, digital and industry, space, climate, energy and mobility, and the last cluster being agriculture and environment. Now, what we know is that there's great overlapping between the clusters. That's why here at Argentum, at the strategy department, each of the strategists is in charge of one major cluster and a secondary cluster. I am in charge of cluster 5, which is climate, energy, and mobility, and my secondary cluster is cluster 4, digital, industry, and space. And the reason those two, I'm assigned to those 2 is because of the overlapping between the clusters. The European Union is very much invested in 2 major transitions: the green transition and the digital transition, to make Europe more accessible digitally and greener and more eco-friendly. So what we see is that there's a lot of overlapping between the clusters, and it makes sense that we're all familiar with all clusters, but specialize in specific clusters that usually go together. So this is very generally about the strategy department. Now we'll turn to look at the strategy process. And what you see in front of you is a cycle we call the strategy process that enables us to offer our clients constant support and a stream of funding opportunities. So we start with the first step, which is preparation, where we kick off by meeting you, our clients, and first of all, learning more about you, about your specific requirements, your funding requirements, what kind of funding you'd be interested in, what kind of participation. And then we take that information and based on our expertise, devise an initial plan, which is the strategic assessment. The strategic assessment lists a number, quite a large number of funding opportunities from various aspects, and we try to always have three different levels of funding opportunities to present to each and all our clients. Those levels being national funding in your specific country of origin, bilateral funding between yourself and at least one other partner from a different country, which we will be focusing on in a minute, and European funding, meaning on a larger European level, usually relating to the Horizon Europe program. And these three levels enable us at the strategic department and at Argentum as a whole to offer you a constant flow of quality funding opportunities from various sources. After the initial plan, we move into a long-term plan where we gather your feedback and input on the strategic assessment and devise together a submission plan, which will be for several months up to a year. And that allows you to have, shortly after you sign with us, a clear roadmap detailing how and when we will approach with our projects and submission. That allows us to plan well ahead and to show you in advance what kind of projects, what types, what kind of funding we plan to submit you at what part of the year. Which leads us to the final part of the cycle, which is the submission. And actually the last step of the cycle starts a new cycle, because here at Argentum, we believe that where one project ends, another begins. That's the basic of our multiple submission strategy logic, which we will turn to later in the presentation. So once we are done with one project, we aim to start and get you involved into another project. Sometimes the projects occur at the same time. And by doing so, we have this constant stream of projects and opportunities available for you, our clients. Throughout the cycle, you will always be accompanied here at Argentum by the same strategists so that we can form an ongoing relationship between our companies. Let's turn now to discuss bilateral projects, our topic for today. Now, we'll start by discussing this more generally and reach specific programs and funding directions a bit later. First of all, we need to establish that bilateral projects involve at least two participants. In some cases, they can involve a lot more, but this is the minimal requirement. The number may be flexible, and that is quite beneficial because that allows you to plan your projects according to both your capacity and your scope. If, for instance, you'd like to engage with only one partner, then that's obviously a possibility and a good one. If you'd be more interested in a wider project with, let's say, 2 to 5 partners, then that also could be done. Now, in most cases, when joining a bilateral project, participants are required of 3 main requirements. First of all, to be from different countries. Second, each participant has to be independent from one another. And the third is to fulfill certain eligibility criteria, which are defined by project guidelines and relevant funding opportunities. Now here, there's another one of our many benefits of using our services where we can support and guide you throughout this process. First of all, by forming a consortia with could be one participant or several other participants, ensuring or helping you ensure the eligibility criteria, an issue that we'll get back to later as well, and establishing that the project fits the guidelines of the project provider. Moving on, we have different types of bilateral projects, and these are divided into two main categories, with one that's kind of a combo category in between. The first category is bottom-up, which is a very good opportunity for you to advance a project you might have in the pipeline and we're waiting the right opportunity, partners, or funding. Bottom-up projects do not have a thematic focus, rather they are open to all R&D projects. The mirror image of that is top-down projects, which are focused on one thematic issue, usually to provide a solution to a given problem. Now here with top-down, that's where your expertise can shine, because you'll be working on a closely defined project within your field of interest and with partners that closely relate to your field of activities. In between, we have the third option, the sector or cluster-centered bottom-up, which is sort of a combo option, which in a way allows you to enjoy the best of both worlds. It's open enough to allow flexibility, but it remains within the broader theme of one theme or cluster, which is specifically relevant to you. Now, here at Argentum and at the strategic department specifically, our aim is to get our clients not into just one of these options, but into all of these bilateral projects, meaning we'll try to target bottom-up options, top-down, and clustered-centered bottom-up options for you. And the benefit of it is that different options occur at different parts of the year. So for instance, if in a month or two, we know that there's a bottom-up call that might be relevant for you, we'll try to get you engaged at that project at that time, and we'll keep a top-down option for a bilateral project later down the year. Now, moving on, what we can generally see are the benefits of bilateral calls are several. First of all, bilateral calls are ideal for tailor-made projects, which, as we already established, can be performed by at least 2 partners or by a small consortium, let's say 2 to 5 partners. And as we've already seen, they present an opportunity for you to engage in a project either with your natural partners, research partners, or a project you've had in your pipeline and we're waiting the right opportunity. So there are definite benefits to participating, and our multiple submission strategy here at Argentum offers you the best advantages to participating in bilateral calls. Since, as we said, we aim to get you involved in such calls as part of a wider year-long plan that will see you maximizing your ability to submit grant proposals. So after briefly going into the structure of Argentum and the strategic department, and after going into generally bilateral calls, let's move and discuss specific bilateral programs. For today's webinar, we will be focusing on the Eureka platform, which is one of the largest and longest running platforms for bilateral projects. Eureka has been established in 1985. At current, it comprises of 44 eligible countries. And unlike other platforms, Eureka, although it is mainly comprised of EU members, is also of a wider geographical scope and involves countries, both countries that are Horizon associated countries, such as Israel, and also several non-European countries that are not associated with the Horizon Europe program. Those could be Argentina, Canada, South Africa, South Korea. And this unique geographical setting offers you quite a few advantages. For instance, as a company based in the European Union, you could widely benefit from a bilateral project with a high-tech hub company, with a company from a high-tech hub such as Israel or South Korea, or from a completely different region, such as Argentina or South Africa. Only yesterday, for instance, there was a news article on CNBC Africa that mentioned that South Africa is ranked as the best market investment destination for EU companies. So Eureka offers this geographical variety, which for you is a big advantage. The flagship of Eureka, the flagship program is Eurostars, which we'll turn our attention to momentarily. First, we'll look into the internal division in the Eureka family. And as you can see on screen, the Eureka family has three main branches, which more or less coincide with the bottom-up, top-down, and clustered centered top-down options. On the left side, we have Eurostars, which is, as we mentioned, the flagship option. We'll go into it in a minute. Then we've got networks, which are specific bilateral calls, which will mention 6 such options, which are only a sample of such available options at the moment. And last, we've got clusters. At the moment, we have 5 Eureka clusters. We'll list them later in our presentation, that are thematic and offer are more closely defined than the 2 other options. Now, throughout the year, there will always be some relevant calls from either of these branches, and our mission at the strategic department will be to fit you into the right branch at the right time regarding your scope, capacity, and interests at the given moment. So let's turn our attention first to Eurostars, the flagship program of Eureka. And Eurostars is a long-running program, and as with other Eureka programs, it is also based on national funding mechanism. Eureka as a whole doesn't have funds of itself. It gets, the funding is provided through national funding institutions in the respective countries. Now, what we should notice, excuse me, particular in this slide, is the relative high success rate. You may notice that Eurostars has a success rate of close to 30%, and this is quite high. It is considerably higher than other programs you might be familiar with, such as the EIC Accelerator or EIC Pathfinder, which are quite competitive. So Eurostars offers you a relative high success rate, quite a good source of potential funding. Eurostars has usually 2 deadlines throughout the year, and please notice that the next upcoming deadline is the 15th of September 2022, exactly 3 months from now. So if you'd be interested later in working with us, this is one of the many bilateral programs that we could target for you in the near future. And our mission would be not to just have Eurostars as a bilateral option for Eureka, but since this is 3 months ahead, to try and find also a bilateral call that could be closer down the line, which brings us exactly to our next option, being network projects. So network projects are, as we said, specific bilateral calls that involve 2 countries, could be more than 2. Again, they have national fund based on a national funding mechanism, and are a very good opportunity for you to either elevate existing partnerships or to find new partnerships, and we at the strategic department could aid you in doing just so. One other benefit of network projects is that in most cases, such projects tend to be bottom-up, meaning that they are open to most kinds of R&D projects. So let's turn and discuss 6 of the currently available network projects. Here are the first 3 ones with relatively close deadlines. We've got, for instance, and this is only a sample of the available projects, what we tried here is to give you both an overview of relative calls, and also, which is quite important, to experience the geographical diversity of network projects. So for instance, we see that in 2 weeks' time, we've got a call specifically for Switzerland and Israel. By the end of June, we also have the Danube call, a new call, which is very interesting because it involves several countries from the Danube region and encourages participation between at least 2 of these countries, preferably more. We also have France, Spain for the 15th of July, and generally speaking, our advice would be to allocate at least 4 weeks, preferably 6 weeks, for devising and preparing such a bilateral network project. Meaning, if you'd be interested, for instance, to start working with us right now, we could potentially still make it on time for the France-Spain call for the 15th of July. But if we don't, if we're not eligible, if we're not on time for this call, we are not, we shouldn't be discouraged, because these types of calls tend to recur once a year, sometimes more. So for instance, if you find the Danube call intriguing, then we suppose that it will recur either later in 2022 or by the end, by the end of 2022 or sometime in 2023. Let's look at options that are a bit further down the line, 3 months to 6 months. And we can see also we've got, for instance, Finland and France collaboration, 26th of September. We've got Canada, Spain, late October. And in between, we've got another very interesting opportunity, Eurostars Brazil, which is an interesting opportunity in that it involves uniquely Brazil, which is not part regularly of Eureka, and involves several countries that are part of Eureka, Belgium, Finland, Portugal, Spain, Turkey, and the Netherlands. And this again offers you to widen your geographical scope and engage with countries and regions that you might not have been able to or interested in engaging otherwise. So to conclude these last 2 slides, what we've sampled here is just 6 of the upcoming network projects. There are plenty more such available options, and there will be plenty more further down the line. Our part as your strategist will be to locate the most relevant calls, network projects for you, which are most suited to your annual submission plan, your current R&D activities, and your capacity. So now that we've looked at Eurostars and network projects, let's look into the clusters, the Eureka clusters, and what they have to offer. At present, we have, as mentioned earlier, 5 clusters under Eureka. There's also some interlocking between the clusters, and they, for instance, most of them take part in a mega cluster of sustainability that took place in May and will probably take place again later down the line. We can go over the clusters now, and we've arranged them by the next upcoming deadlines. So to start with, we've got Eureka, which is the Eureka cluster that specifies low carbon tech solutions and is also part of the Eureka cross cluster on sustainability. Eureka, has a short proposal and a full proposal, and you can apply to this program at any of the deadlines, and at the next deadline you'll have the full proposal. So the next deadline is the 18th of June, where you can have provide the short proposal. Afterwards, the next deadline will be November 2022, where if you have already submitted the short proposal, you will be able to submit the full proposal, or if you are just getting started, then you can submit the first stage. Moving on, we've got Celtic Next, which is a communication-centered cluster. However, Celtic Next has a wider scope, which currently includes themes such as smart cities, e-health, and e-care, meaning that we see here 2 things. First of all, there's a lot of overlapping between themes and clusters. Here we can see, for instance, digital solutions and health. And second of all, there's a lot of potential for you here, even if at first glance, the communication theme doesn't seem like the best option for you. So our role here will be to see if within the various themes of Celtic Next, we can also fit you in as well. The next deadline for Celtic Next will be October 2022. It also has usually 2 deadlines throughout the year. Moving on, we've got ITF4, which centers on software innovation. This is the R&D and I, research, development, and innovation cluster, and is industry driven, but it's not limited solely to for-profit companies. So for instance, if you have research partners, they can well take part in such a bilateral project. The next deadline here will also be November 2022. The fourth cluster is SMART, which centers on advanced manufacturing, specifically the adoption, integration, and upscaling of manufacturing tech. We don't have a definitive deadline yet, but it's supposed to be September 2022, which brings us also to the final Eureka cluster, which is XS, ECS, electronics, components, and system applications, which deals with sustainable and digital transformation. As we mentioned earlier, this is one of the key themes that the European Union is engaged with. So also with this cluster, we can well notice the overlapping between clusters and between themes. And our mission here will be to get you into the cluster and project that are best suited to your immediate and long-term projects. So after we've discussed bilateral calls and have had the opportunity to look into specific projects, let's discuss how Argentum can support you. So first of all, our mission here is to locate the best suited bilateral calls for you and to plan well in ahead, so you'll have, as I said earlier, a clear roadmap for the year. To do so, we will utilize our ACE, Argentum Consortia Ecosystem Network, to match you with relative partners. And also, we will support you in the preliminary eligibility checks with the national contact points. This is a key issue with Eureka project, and it might be somewhat tricky. There's a lot of details. There's plenty of differences between different national funding institutions. So we'll be here to lend you our support and advice. And the last part is the writing process, which we will support all the way up to the submission, thanks to our grant writing skills and our experience. The writing will be done by the professional team here at Argentum, and we at the strategic department have very close work relations with them. And as I mentioned, throughout the year, you will have one strategist, while you might have different project managers for different projects. So the benefit of having one strategist is that you'll know always that there's one person, at least here at Argentum, that knows you well, knows your plan and how to advance your goal throughout the year. Let's conclude this webinar by looking at Argentum's proposition, and our multiple submission strategy is, as we have already spoken, based on the rationale that we would like to maximize your participation in consortia, in projects, in bilateral projects, to apply you to various opportunities, to minimize your time investment while we take on as much as we can of the writing process, to seize opportunities, to position you in the EU's ecosystem, create a financial funding flow, and fund various levels of development. So this brings us to the end of our webinar. I'd like to thank you all for attending. and we all hope that you found this webinar informative. Bella, our VP of Sales and Marketing, will look forward to hearing from you all. You can contact her at the email below. So thank you all again for joining, and have a great day.